Right, how are we doing, everybody? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're talking very much about timing. What is timing? Well, in its pure simplicity, timing is the ability to return the club face back to square to target upon separation once the ball has left the face after that kind of compression period. It's obviously the nuts and crannies of the golf swing. Your ability to be able to hit the ball straight is heavily reliant on your ability to time. But time exactly what, I sometimes think gets misdiagnosed, right? What happens in the golf swing in terms of the functionality of the lead arm is that essentially you are going to induce a wrist cock, which is increasing this angulation, which I'm sure we're all very accustomed to, and also your arm is going to rotate as well. So you can see the way my watch face would go pointing more up towards the ceiling. Well, that inevitably means in the downswing what you need to do is time the correct amount of rotation of the lead arm, right, to get the club face back to square to target, but also time the correct amount of down cocking, because obviously if you hold on to the same amount of angulation, you would miss the ball. So effectively you are trying to time both of those two components to be able to return the club face square. Well, this is obviously one of the reasons why golf is so difficult to get some sort of sense of repeatability, right? Because if all of a sudden you are struggling a little bit with your timing, right, and you're not kind of finding that point of release as to when to kind of release and down cock the club, as we're going to talk about, well, then this is when you start to struggle. So for example, what happens with better golfers is that the arm tends to work, should we say, too quickly, which means that the club face is vulnerably pointing off towards the right. What happens with amateur golfers is that potentially the lead arm slows down too much, which means that you end up getting too flicky and the club face is vulnerable of pointing left. Or you end up with a bent arm, or you end up looking a bit flicky. So a lot of these sort of problems occur because of timing, but it's the sequence in the timing that's the key thing. See, what we've talked a lot about on the channel recently is the backswing position. And what we've also been talking about is the ability to learn that, you know, to initiate the downswing as a lower body rotation, quickly followed by the shoulders. What we kind of also said in the last video is the functionality of the elbow. So hypothetically, if you've got a backswing position which is, should we say, acceptable, and then you transition with the lower body, then what starts to happen is by the time you get to left arm horizontal, you can see the way that the club shaft would be either pointing down towards the ball to target or slightly shallower than that, which is fine. And also what you can start to see now is that as I continue to turn my hips and shoulders, that would help the club stay on plane. And then eventually what would need to happen is my left arm about now would start to slow down, therefore allowing the club to down cock on the back of the ball. Now, the release, which is this down cocking component, is a natural phenomenon. So if you can sequence the transitional area correctly, then you have a much greater chance of returning the club face square on the back of the ball more of the time. So you have to be slightly cautious, because I think one of the things that gets most often overlooked is the hip rotation part. So again, if I just reintroduce my favorite little hip bar, and what we'll be able to see is that if I can turn back in posture, initiate the downswing with a lower body squaring action, so this way, and then I continue to turn my hips, which we'll talk about on the channel, this all helps me keep the club on plane, hold on to things like the elbow and the right hand, and then therefore be able to get this sort of time and release of getting the club face square on the back of the ball. So if you get this bit wrong, so you kind of don't realize, but you're changing the orientation of your rotation into the different, you know, into the incorrect direction, well then you're either going to go over there or you're going to get flicky. And this is why, you know, I think amateur golfers tend to get a little bit lost because of the sequence of events. So what would I do? Well, I would suggest that first and foremost, obviously work on the transition, which is what I've been talking about. So make sure by left arm horizontally you can get to this sort of position. Then to kind of get this feeling of tempo and timing for you, but then obviously as you hit some shots, you'll soon know as to which one you fall foul of. Are you too quick with your lead arm, or are you too slow? But I suppose what I'm also trying to say is that if you have a decent sequence, lower body, shoulders, then you're generally going to find that you're going to have a much greater chance of getting the club face square more of the time. Now, what I've done before on the channel as well is that we've introduced the G-force training aid. One of the things that you can do to help your feeling of timing and to know whether you are working, should we say, in a sequence, is to introduce a G-force training aid. So there are lots of clubs out there that are extra whippy to give you this sort of sense of feel and release, but obviously very few where you can actually end up hitting a golf ball. Now G-force offer a wedge option, which we'll come back to short game on that in the future, and then they offer a 7-iron and a driver. And I think that, you know, the benefit of this club, like I said, is the feeling of release will feel relative to each person depending on how fast things like your body moves. So what you're trying to do with this training aid is obviously hit some shots and get some feedback. And one of the things that most amateur golfers struggle with when they use this, either in lessons or on feedback of people that have bought it, is they miss it right. And the main reason for this is because people tend to go this way, which means the club gets stuck, should we say, slightly under plane, and then therefore you can't help it out excessively with this club by rolling, because it doesn't allow you to as much, because they'll be around the spine of the shaft, and therefore you struggle to hit it straight. So what you would do with this training club is that if you're struggling to hit it straight, it would teach you that you've got something potentially wrong in your transition, and that's what's inhibiting your ability to find that timing. So it's a challenge to hit it straight, but I suppose those that have got them, what I'm also trying to say is that it's not impossible either to be able to learn how to use these clubs straight, especially that driver as well. If you're struggling with the driver as well, then this is a useful training aid, because obviously it's exactly the same sequence. So like the majority of the videos I put onto the channel, I'm normally holding an iron in the hand, and most people go, should I do the same for the driver? It's like, yeah, it's holistically the same, apart from the setup. And it's the same with this club. Most people get stuck because they extend this way. Club gets stuck under plane, or you end up kind of drifting this way and you're shoving the club out here. So it's a fantastic training aid to use when you practice down the range to suggest whether you are transitioning and then releasing the club as well. So it's not the easiest thing to use in the world, but even if you start to, similar to that one I believe, although I can't pick up the ball flight, even if you start to knock a few of these off to the right, it will just show you what it is that you need to work on to be able to get that club face square. And then on the back of that, you're going to start to find some timing in your golf swing. So timing is obviously, in simplicity, the ability to return the club face square. Effectively what you're timing, in my opinion, is a lot to do with the lead arm in terms of the rotation and the down cocking onto the back of the ball. But what should happen is that in the transition, as we talked about in the last few videos, it should be rotation led, then you can start down cocking in towards the back of the ball. And then that's going to give you a much greater chance of timing. Next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the hips as well, which will help you. Quite a few golfers end up transitioning well and then getting a bit stuck here. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. But hopefully at least we're starting to get a better idea as to if your timing is off, possibly it's not just so much about, like I said earlier, that your arm's too quick or too slow. What I'm trying to say is it's normally due to the sequence of events, which means that that transitional area, you're kind of going this way, or maybe you're going a bit this way. Always appreciate one of those. Remember, it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you're going to do that, you might as well press the little bell icon. Work on that timing, work on that sequencing. Going to put loads of drills out again soon on the channel. I'll catch up with you guys again soon.